I'm 26 now and living in Pennsylvania, but when I was growing up, I lived in Montpelier, Vermont. My summers were spent hiking mountains, swimming in lakes, and exploring expansive forests. I knew that my state had bears and rattlesnakes in its more secluded, mountainous regions, but I never imagined that there was anything more terrifying than those out there. When I was 19, my friend Emily and I went to Moss Glen Falls for a day of swimming and picnicking. It gave us a nice change of scenery from campus. The waterfall is located in Stowe, which is a remote town in Vermont that has a population of barely 4,000. Emily was from another state and had never really seen much of the area beyond our college's campus, so I figured showing her some of Vermont's quaint locations was in order. The day was perfect. We had packed plenty of food, sunscreen, and towels, and since it was a weekday afternoon, there was no one else there at the falls except for an elderly couple who left not long after we got there. We spread our towels out on a large rock by the falls and alternated between climbing up the waterfall edges to get to the swimming pools and relaxing in the late afternoon sun. It was peaceful, and it was a perfect break after a long day of homework and classes. As the day wore on, Emily wanted to explore some of the trails near the falls. I was familiar with a few of them and tried to keep her on those. What I didn't account for was that she would insist on exploring some of the more outlying trails, and that we would consequently get lost. We spent nearly an hour walking in circles, our arms and legs getting covered in mosquito bites, and our bathing suits drying uncomfortably onto our skin. We had the flashlights on our phones to give us a little light once the sun set, but they didn't do much to illuminate the dense undergrowth shrouding both sides of the trail. Finally, we came across a blackberry patch that we were pretty sure we had seen earlier, so by logical default, we started heading down the path closest to the bushes. Emily kept asking me if I heard twigs snapping near us, and I brushed it off as a city girl being afraid of deer or rabbits. I didn't hear anything myself, so I figured she was feeling paranoid due to it being the first time that she was lost in the woods. Then, I heard it. The noise came from somewhere behind us, and it was too loud to be a small animal like a rabbit. I figured it was another person out walking, or maybe a herd of deer passing through. Stowe has never been a populous town, and the locals could argue that there's more deer than people in the area. I ignored the uneasy feeling building in the pit of my stomach and kept walking, chalking it up to my friend's paranoia rubbing off on me, and I babbled senselessly about cute guys to keep Emily and I distracted. After another 10 minutes of walking, we finally came in sight of the trailhead. There was a large boulder there with a plaque on it, dedicated to a young woman who had been murdered at the falls back in 1991, and right beyond that was my car. As we neared the boulder, relief evident on Emily's face, a weird noise came from the woods behind us. It sounded almost like a cat, but it was distorted and static, like it was coming out of an old radio. My first instinct was that the cat was wounded or in danger. I've always been an animal lover, and if there was a hurt cat, I wasn't about to leave it to become a coyote snack. I turned around, ignoring Emily begging me to just get in the car, and peered back into the trail opening. I gave Emily the keys and told her to get our towels, and I promised I'd be back momentarily. If I didn't find the cat right away, I wasn't going to spend forever looking for it, but I couldn't just drive away either. With the loss of the second flashlight, the woods seemed to be a bit more eerie to me, and the darkness was nagging at my peripheral vision. I walked a little ways down the path as I called to the cat, hoping to locate it by its meow. but I didn't hear anything for several moments. I was about to give up when I heard a low, out-of-place laugh behind me. I spun around, my heart beating too fast, but all I saw was a large buck. I remember muttering something about stupid, sneaky deer. Then I headed back to the trailhead. That was when the deer laughed again, and I froze. The harsh sound was completely unnatural. For those of you who don't know, deer make sounds like grunts, bleats, and snorts. They don't make any sort of laughter-like noises, and even if they did, it wouldn't have the same cadence as a human's laugh would, and as this deer's did. This situation was weird and unnerving, and I kept hoping that someone would pop their head out from around a tree and tell me it was a prank. That didn't happen. The deer took a few steps towards me, and then the odd cat sound came from it again. I almost literally threw my hands up in a nope gesture, and I started walking away from it as quickly as I could. I was almost inside of the end of the trail when I felt something snag my hair. I swatted it away, thinking it was a branch since there was a lot of low-hanging trees along the trail, but the sensation returned instantly. I reached up to tug my hair free, but it wouldn't come loose. I turned to face the offending tree, my heart thumping in shock. The deer, now on its hind legs, had my hair caught on one of its antler points. The snarls from a day of swimming and hiking were entangled around its antler, and I could feel its cold breath on my face. Not warm, not hot, but icy cold breath wreathed around me. I let out the most shrill scream I had ever heard myself make, and I violently yanked my hair off of its antlers. I sprinted for my car, screaming the whole way for Emily to start it. I heard the engine turn when I neared the boulder, and she didn't hesitate to floor it as soon as I was in the car. The tears streaming down my face were enough motivation. She didn't question me until we were nearly 5 miles from Moss Glen. I told her about the weird noises and the deer getting up in my face. I told her it startled me, and that on top of the stress of being lost was just enough to make me panic. She bought my explanation, agreeing that we were both super tired and adding that my mind was probably playing tricks on me. I haven't returned to Stowe since then, even though I visited Vermont recently. I know there's probably some sort of rational explanation for what I saw and heard, but I haven't been able to find what that would be. What I never told Emily that night was that the buck had fangs, or how there had been blood on its mouth. I never shared that the huge animal was able to sneak up on me noiselessly, and I didn't bother telling her that it had the coldest breath I'd ever felt. She was my friend, but that didn't mean she would believe a crazy story. Emily, if you're reading this, I hope you know I didn't want to lie. I was panicked, and in my 19-year-old mind, I didn't want to get labeled as crazy or a liar. Please forgive me, and please never go to Moss Glen alone. So for the past few months, there has been something that seems to be stalking my house. Weird things began to happen soon after we started to clear out some of the wooded area behind my house. At first, I didn't think anything of the weird sounds, and the neighbor's dog alerting to something in the woods because we have coyotes in the area. Now, as someone that lives in a large family, we all like to joke about things like this being a supernatural creature of some sort, but none of us really gave that any real thought. After the weird happenings continued, I started to get more nervous. Me being nervous leads to dumb decisions. So when I smelled something that smelled like a rotting corpse, I decided to take an impromptu walk in the woods. It was probably around 10 p.m. when I left the house and made my way over to the tree line with the only flashlight on my phone. I heard something to the side of me. It sounded like a twig snapping, so I backed up and shined my light to the side. There were 2 pinpoints of light, which looked like eyes reflecting from my phone's light. Thinking it was probably a deer, as it was too high to be one of my cats or dog, I just started talking to it. Things like, "Hi there," and "It's okay, come here." Just as the thing began moving towards me, my neighbors let out their dog. She ran in front of me and began to growl. It was a deep, angry sound which I had never heard her make before. I quickly ran back into my house and checked over the video feed that was pointed towards the barn. It hadn't caught much other than me standing there and the 2 reflecting eyes. When the dog didn't calm down after about 5 or so minutes, I went back out, this time only standing on the porch. I whistled to the dog and waited a few seconds. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard my whistle again. I stood for a few seconds, thinking it could have just been an echo, but I heard it again. It sounded just like what had left my mouth just a minute before. And then I heard my own voice saying, "It's okay." It repeated it over and over. At this point, I was terrified, so I yelled, "Sadie, home," and ducked inside my house. After locking all the doors, I ran to the cameras, and all I saw was a deer-like head sticking out of the tree line. I looked at it in horror. I remember it having antlers, but they were larger than those on any buck I had ever seen in this area. I slept in the front room that night, with all the lights on. Nothing happened for a few nights, so I figured I could sleep out in the front room without having to keep my eyes on every window. It was about 1 or 2 a.m. when I woke up to scuffing on the wooden deck. I watched the camera as a black figure climbed onto the 2 chairs underneath the camera. I stayed as still as I could, watching it as it turned its head, looking towards the camera, as if it was trying to make sure I was aware of its presence. I saw that it had the same abnormal antlers as the thing that had been in the woods days before. I rolled over and tried to get some sleep, and woke up the next morning leaning against the glass of my door, which was probably unrelated and just stress-related sleepwalking. The next day it snowed, so we put the cats in the garage so they would be warm. I stepped out after the sun set to go sit in the hot tub for a while. I was in for probably 5 minutes before I started hearing a cat meowing. I quickly got out and went inside, knowing that there were no cats outside, so there would be nothing making that sound. That night, I called my then boyfriend and asked him about something he had seen. He told me when we were playing a game of hide-and-seek tag that he had felt like something was watching him, and when he turned around, he said he saw something partially hidden behind a tree. He claimed it was a humanoid figure, taller than he was, with what looked like antlers and dirty, sallow-looking skin. I told him about what I had seen and heard, and when I mentioned how it seemed to mimic my voice, he said that he thought he had heard me calling out for him, but when he followed, he just ended up lost in the woods. This thing still comes around, but I try not to be scared of it, as if it was going to attack, it would have already. Even with positive thinking, I still feel like I'm being hunted. I was visiting Santa Fe, New Mexico about a year ago with some family. It was a typical trip, the usual boring stuff surrounding car rides and all that. But when we get there, my family decided that we should go camping. We're all on board with this idea, So we grab the tents and all that and head out. Now, as some background, my family has some Navajo blood in them, and thus causes them to be very superstitious. I've heard the Skinwalker stories before, and I never believed them because there's no way at all something like that could be true. But I've been told that whatever you do not look at them or interact with them. So we get to our camping site, and there's 5 of us, and we're all hanging out around the fire with our tents all set up near us. Around what I assume was 11:30 or so at night, I'm a few beers deep, and I tell everybody I'm going to take a piss real quick. So I walk about 20 yards away, and suddenly, I'm overcome with the most intense feeling of fear that you can possibly imagine. I was absolutely terrified, and I had no idea why. Suddenly, I no longer have to use the restroom, and I almost immediately book it back to the fire. As I'm running, I just feel like if I don't make it back within seconds, I'll die. I'm running as if my life depends on it. So I get back and everybody is freaking out, being the superstitious bunch that they are, and this is all beginning to make sense to me. They tell me almost immediately that it's a skinwalker, and to change the topic and dismiss all thoughts of it immediately. So eventually, we somehow manage to forget about it, and we head into our tents to sleep. About what I assume was 2 hours after we went into the tents, I hear movement outside, and the same feeling of fear from earlier comes over me again. I tell myself not to think of it, but I simply can't do it. Too scared to even speak or move, I can't wake up my family. The light provided from the smoldering coals outside revealed a tall, humanoid shape creeping around outside. I'm not sure how long it was there, but the feeling eventually went away, and I was unable to get any sleep that night. Regardless, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced, and I hope I never have an interaction with these creatures again. I live in southern Maryland on a large plot of land. We have 3 large farm dogs, 2 of whom are German shepherds. They're very used to the various animals that pursue our property and rarely get spooked or upset. We also have lots of livestock, and it's not uncommon for us to lose a random animal or find a pile of chicken feathers in the corner of our property. However, we've always been able to explain it or add extra protection for our flocks. Around 8 months ago, we started losing chickens at an alarming rate. They would just disappear, and even our shepherds couldn't scent them anywhere on our property. For a while, we figured it was just a barred owl or some other bird of prey. The main problem with that theory was that 10 would disappear at a time, rather than a normal 1, 2 max. We decided to put up a trail cam to watch our most eastern flock. Almost immediately, the problem stopped, so we took them down. But then it got stranger. I've always gotten sleep paralysis, and like to believe I'm pretty comfortable with my sleep paralysis demon. It's never really been something that concerned me. However, around the same time as we started losing chickens, I would see something different in my sleep paralysis. Where my demon always chills out in the corner of the room and doesn't move, this thing would hang from my rafters and move back and forth across them, almost like a really quick sloth. It had long-ass fingers and looked really skinny, like a super emaciated human with a weirdly long head. I've noticed that it literally always stared at me from any part of the room it's in. At the time, I decided not to worry about it and figured it was just a bad bout of anxiety. Which brings us to September of 2018. One night I woke up around 2, completely able to move my body. Everything seemed normal. No one else was sleeping in the house that night, but that's pretty standard around that time of year. I glanced up at my rafters and saw the long-fingered thing moving and looking at me. I immediately turned on my bedside lamp, and it was gone. Yet again, I chalked it up to stress and decided to go downstairs to grab a cup of water. All of our dogs were happily asleep, so I went back to bed and turned off the light. The second it was dark, I could see it again, without my eyes having to adjust. This freaked me out enough, but all of a sudden, I heard our Rottweiler get up and start growling at the door. He rarely barks, let alone growls. I called out his name, but he kept going. He got louder and louder until the dogs woke up and joined in. At this point, I was flipping shit, so I turned my light back on and grabbed my hunting rifle and flashlight. I went downstairs and took 2 of the dogs outside. I swear to God, I have never heard a night so silent. I moved my flashlight slowly around the perimeter, looking for the shine of eyes, or really anything. All of a sudden, our chickens started going crazy, like so loud they distracted the dogs, who sprinted out towards them. I followed them only to find 0 chickens outside, and our fence torn down. There's no animals in our area that could even try to do that, so we hauled ass back inside and camped out for the evening. It was quiet after that, and when morning came, all of the chickens were safely inside their coop. I, stupidly, figured the problem was solved and decided not to worry about it. The only thing was, I started seeing the long-fingered rafter thing every time I turned out my light. Eventually, I got so freaked out, we decided to call a shaman. She told us that we had a wendigo problem and that she would come and sage the house. We opened every single window and door and let her do her thing. And since then, we haven't had a problem indoors. The issue now is that when we walk our dogs at night or go to put our chickens inside, I swear I feel something watching me. I've had a couple of other people bring up that they feel weird outside at night, and nobody goes outside alone anymore. Whenever we walk our dogs near the woods, even in broad daylight, they'll get so anxious that we've taken to walking them on a leash. In general, we just avoid the roads near the forest entirely. The creepiest part is sometimes at night, we hear lots of screaming. We often assume it's just the coyotes, but every once in a while, it's just enough that we get scared. A couple times it's been a lone shriek, which is very uncommon for coyotes or even foxes. A few nights ago, we were asleep in bed when we heard a scream from directly outside our window. My partner was worried that someone was hurt, so we opened our window and yelled, "Is everyone okay?" We heard a loud shuffling sound, almost like someone scrambling off our roof. It sounded heavier than a bird of prey, but way lighter than a person. Our dog started barking, and within a minute, we heard another scream, a good half mile away.